Welcome back to Conservatorium Maastricht, where we will be continuing our master research presentations. This is the second one of the day, after which we will still have a third one. Now we will see the presentation video of Luca Pedana, after which we return to the live room for the Q&A. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to my master thesis presentation. In this research, I explored how rhythms from the Adowa performance tradition from Ghana can be transformed into tools for contemporary jazz composition and arranging, together with Schoenberg's 12-tone techniques. The starting point of this research goes back to my bachelor studies, when I first discovered Adowa music while searching for African rhythms that I could adapt for the drum set. What interested me immediately was that the rhythmic figures were completely different from the musical language I was used to and I played before. At the same time, the music had this very natural polyrhythmic character, which, from a drummer's perspective, opened new ways of thinking about coordination, independence, and groove. The overall feel of the music also connected naturally to jazz and swing, which grew my interest in exploring its possibilities. At the same time, I have always been interested in working with systems and structured approaches in music. Coming from a classical background, I was used to practicing and creating music through rules and frameworks, and over time I became curious in building my own compositional system. This eventually led me to the central idea behind this thesis. Rather than attempting to recreate traditional Adowa music, could its rhythms be transformed into a practical compositional tool and into new creative possibilities for composition, improvisation, and rhythmic organization? And beyond the rhythmic material, what could I include to also generate melodic and harmonic material? These thoughts led me to the following research questions. What are effective ways of incorporating the Adowa rhythm in own contemporary jazz compositions and arrangements, and can Schoenberg's techniques contribute to their development? To explore this further, I established following sub-questions. What are the key rhythmic characteristics of Adowa dance music, and how can they be transcribed and reduced for later development? What are effective ways of incorporating the Adowa rhythm in own contemporary jazz compositions and arrangements? How can 12-tone rows lead the melodic and harmonic material? Before explaining the practical process of the research, I would first like to briefly introduce the musical foundations and concepts that formed the basis of this thesis. Adowa is a traditional dance from the Ashanti, a subgroup of the Akan ethnic group mainly located here, in southern and central Ghana. Adowa music, on the other hand, refers to the percussion ensemble and vocal chorus accompanying the dance. Traditionally, Adowa was mainly performed during funerals, but over time it evolved into art form that is now also performed during different social events and ceremonies. One of the aspects that interested me most about Adowa was the different rhythmic layers within the ensemble and its complexity, created through the variety of natural polyrhythmic textures within the groove. From a drummer's perspective, what interested me the most about this music was how different the rhythmic language felt compared to the musical language I was used to, and the amount of new figures I could take from it. Not only did it create completely new ways of thinking about coordination, independence, phrasing and groove, but the strong ternary feel within the music also connects naturally to traditional jazz and could easily be translated and used in that context. From a composer's perspective, I did not try to imitate Adowa music directly, but rather became interested in exploring how some of its rhythmic structures could be transformed into fragmented material from original compositions and arrangements. Now that the rhythmic material part for this thesis is covered, it still needs another component. Since a large part of this research focused mainly on the rhythm, I was also searching for a way to generate melodic and harmonic material through a more systematic approach. That's when I decided to work with Schoenberg's 12-tone technique and use it as a melodic element within this research. Since I wanted to create a structured compositional tool using Adowa rhythms, 12-tone technique became a good addition as it also functions through an existing system of rules. Once a 12-tone row is created, the system automatically brings up 48 different variations through transformations such as prime rows, inversion, retrograde, and retrograde inversion. This made the system especially interesting for this research, since one generated row could already provide a large amount of lines that could be used to work with compositionally. Rather than applying serialism in a strict traditional sense, I approached it more as a practical compositional tool that could help generate melodic ideas and harmonic movement. One of the main starting points of this research was the experience of being creatively stuck and searching for systems that could still generate musical outcomes even while experiencing these creative blockades or trying to break out of my usual compositional habits. In this way, the 12-tone system functioned more as a framework for experimentation and organization within the compositions. With this background in mind, I will now move on to the methodology section and explain the practical process behind this research. This thesis is situated within artistic research and combines exploratory and qualitative approaches. The process was not based on a fixed order of steps, but rather on an iterative cycle where analysis and artistic experimentation constantly influenced each other. Smith and Dean's visualization of the iterative cycle web shows this process very clearly as a continuous cycle of experimenting, reflecting, adjusting ideas, and reapplying them throughout the research process. In my case, this meant that Adowa rhythms were first examined through transcriptions and reductions and then used as a basis for further creative exploration. The material was then applied in different compositional experiments with 12-tone technique, allowing me to test, reflect, adjust, and refine the results throughout the process. With this methodology in mind, I will dive now into the practical results, starting with the transcription of Adowa rhythms. In order to better understand the rhythmic language of Adowa music, I first transcribed the individual rhythmic layers from the percussion ensemble. Rather than attempting to create complete transcriptions of full performances, I mainly focused on transcribing the basic rhythmic patterns of each instrument. As you can see here, the transcribed material was organized by size, starting with bells and rattles, before moving from the larger drums like atupan down to the smaller drums. Since the next step focused on creating drum set reductions from these transcriptions, organizing it from low to high created a clearer overview of which sounds functioned in a lower and which functioned in a higher register, and therefore came in very handy when trying to find similar pitch representations on the drum set. Since Adowa music is traditionally performed by a larger ensemble, one of the main challenges was reducing this complexity into something playable by a single drummer using only 4 limbs. The process forced me to make decisions about which rhythmic elements were essential and which could be simplified or even omitted. I eventually decided to create 3 different drum set reductions based on the transcribed material. The first reduction looks like this. Having 4 limbs available, I decided to create a drum groove based on 4 different layers. The top line shown here in blue imitates the davuro. For the second line, shown in orange, the rhythm of the branco was translated to the left hand. The third line, shown in purple, imitates the atupan through the bass drum. And finally, the fourth line, shown in green, recreates the rhythm of the second ntrova. On the drum set, this would sound like this. Let's continue with the second reduction. Similar to the first groove, the top line is again a representation of the davuro pattern. For the second line, the rhythm of the dono was translated into the left hand. The third line again imitates the atupan through the bass drum. And finally, the fourth line recreates this time the rhythm of the first antrova pattern. This is how the groove would sound on the drum set. The final and third reduction looks like this. For the third groove, I wanted to move into a slightly different direction and change the way the reduction was constructed. Instead of modifying the left hand to create a longer phrase, this time I changed the right hand pattern in order to create a 2-bar phrase. For the first line, I used a mix from the second and first Davuro pattern. For the second line, I again used the rhythm of the branco, while both Atupan patterns were used for the third line in the bass drum. The fourth line recreates the rhythm of the dono with the left foot on the hi-hat, moving away from the early idea that only bell sounds should be translated to cymbals or hi-hat sounds. Once again, this is how the groove would sound on the drum set. After experimenting with the drum reductions to get an insight into which rhythms felt more essential, the actual process of developing a fragment list was the next step. The idea behind this process was to isolate small chunks and create different rhythmic fragments from the transcribed Adowa material, which could later function as the basis for generating completely new rhythmic structures and phrases. As you can see here, each fragment was assigned a numerical value in order to organize the fragment list and make it easier to later generate numerical combinations instead of working with full rhythmic notation. After a numerical sequence had been generated, I would then translate the numbers back to their assigned rhythmic fragments. Similar to a 12-tone matrix, I wanted to have multiple options for a generated sequence to be used, and therefore decided to also create what I called a negative fragment list. The negative fragment list would just be a mirrored version of the fragment list. Fragments with different beat lengths would avoid overly symmetrical or repetitive rhythmic structures and allow for more flexibility and variety. Since I wanted to create a tool that would produce randomized rhythmic outcomes, I decided to use AI and feed it with rules to generate random numerical sequences that would later determine the order in which the fragments are played after each other. With rules, the composer can manipulate the outcome and guide it in a specific direction. The goal behind this process was to create unpredictable rhythmic outcomes that could move away from my usual compositional habits and generate material I would probably not have written myself. Here's a generated numeral sequence that ChatGPT created after I fed it with rules. This generated numerical sequence could then be translated into this rhythm. One of the first complete practical outcomes of this process was a duo for multi-percussion and drum set. Since the generated sequence were intended to function within a duo setting, certain rules such as equal total beat lengths first had to be established for a generating process so that different generated rhythms could later function together within the composition. In order to create enough contrasting material to work with compositionally, the idea was to create different sections with contrasting generated sequences and then orchestrating them to fit the topic of a percussion duo, and in a later process add transitions so that the individual sections would feel less abrupt. Here you can see an example of the original generated numerical sequence that has been used for the duo. Underneath, you can see the translated version into rhythm. This is how both rhythmic lines would sound together. After the rhythmic framework had been generated, the next step was orchestrating, layering, and developing the rhythmic outcome. Because the base of this was still Adowa, I tried to add some Adowa patterns to create a connection with that music. Here are then both lines after I orchestrated them. While the fragment system mainly focused on generating rhythmic material, the research still needed another component that could help generate melodic and harmonic material as well. This is where Schoenberg's 12-tone technique became part of the research. Rather than using serialism in a strict traditional sense, I approached the 12-tone system more as a practical compositional tool that could help generate melodic ideas outside of my usual compositional habits and provide melodic material that could later be placed onto the generated rhythms I already had in place. Similar to the rhythmic fragment system, the idea was again to work with generated material, rather than composing every melody idea manually from scratch. Darcy James argues pitch wheel later became another useful way of visualizing 12-tone material, next to the traditional 12-tone matrix. Here you can see how a 12-tone row can be visualized as a matrix or as a pitch wheel with the example of Alban Berg's 12-tone row used in his violin concerto. While the matrix organizes the material in a more linear and systematic format, the pitch wheel visualizes the row in a circular way, making intervallic relationships, rotations, and symmetrical structures easier to recognize. So to say, you see very clearly from which point on the circle you can jump to which point. One way I applied these systems compositionally was by using 12-tone rows as melodic material for the generated rhythmic sequences. In this example specifically, I decided to use one line as a traditional bass line and a second line as the upper melodic line. Both lines used the same 12-tone row in order to create certain connection between them, but I generated two different rhythmic sequences so that both lines would still maintain different rhythmic structures. Here you can see the 12-tone row and the two generated sequences I used for this composition. This is then how the generated rhythms would sound together without any pitch material applied to them. And after applying the 12-tone material to the generated rhythms, the result sounded like this. At a later stage, I also experimented with harmonizing the material by adding chords to the existing lines, where the bottom line functioned as the bass line and the upper generated line functioned as the top melody line. After the harmonization, both lines sound like this. The idea of harmonizing the lines was to show that the material could also sound less serial and give it some sort of tonal character, which in my opinion also made the overall musical results sound more fluid and also more useful in certain settings. Another thing I experimented with during the research was the idea of recreating ostinato figures through the combination of 12-tone material and generated rhythmic sequences. The basis for this idea came from a big band piece by Darcy James Argue, where he created an ostinato piano figure using a 12-tone row to underline his composition "You Are Here" from his album Real Enemies. Inspired by this approach, I wanted to try reconstructing something similar using the compositional tools and systems I had developed throughout this research. Here you can hear the ostinato that Argue uses. With this idea in mind, I generated multiple smaller rhythmic sequences in order to have a selection of rhythmic possibilities to create a more overlapping and repetitive ostinato character out of them. In a later process, I then applied a 12-tone row I created to the generated rhythmic material. Here you can see the 12-tone row I used together with the different rhythmic sequences that were randomized through AI. The first line is displayed in red and the second line in blue. The combination of both lines and the 12-tone row resulted in the following ostinato figure. The only note that was not generated is the first bass note. Using the same process, I later created two additional ostinato figures. Together, these ostinatos were then organized into a larger 8-bar structure which sounded like this. Before we move on to the conclusion of this research, once again I would like to get back to the research questions. Through transcriptions and analysis, I found that Adowa rhythms are mainly based on layered rhythmic structures where different instruments interact with each other instead of repeating identical patterns. When reducing these rhythms to the drum set, one of the main challenges was deciding which rhythmic element felt most essential and how they could be combined in a playable way with only 4 limbs available. The fragmentation process later became an important step, since it allowed me to isolate smaller rhythmic ideas and use them independently from their original context. This made it possible to use Adowa rhythms not only as grooves but also as flexible compositional material that could later be reorganized, transformed and developed further. At the same time, it is important to mention that the process of transcription and reduction was also highly personal and left a lot of space for interpretation. The decision of which rhythmic elements felt most essential was based on my own musical perspective and understanding of the material. Because of this, the reduction should not be understood as definitive versions of Adowa rhythm, but rather as personal interpretations that later functioned as compositional material within this research. Several approaches proved effective when incorporating Adowa rhythms into my own compositions and arrangements. The most successful approach was treating Adowa rhythms as flexible compositional material rather than fixed grooves that needed to be reproduced exactly. Working with smaller rhythmic fragments instead of complete grooves made it easier to create variation, avoid repetition, and reorganize the material in different musical contexts. The use of AI-generated sequences also proved valuable. as it introduced unpredictability and helped me move away from my usual compositional habits. While not every generated sequence produced convincing musical results, the process itself often created ideas that could later be refined and developed further. Another effective approach was layering and orchestration. By distributing generated rhythmic material across different instruments, it became possible to recreate some of the interactions and complexity that characterizes Adowa ensembles. This was particularly evident in the percussion duo, the sampled material used in chroma and the ostinato experiments. Another thing that worked well was combining generated material with original Adowa patterns. I sometimes used fixed Adowa-derived patterns alongside the generated material. This helped maintain more of the original Adowa character while still allowing the composition to develop in new directions. Finally, the research showed that the generated material worked best when it was treated as a starting point rather than a finished composition. Processes such as orchestration, harmonization, layering, and further development remained essential in transforming the generated material into convincing musical outcomes. The research showed that 12-tone rows can be used as a source for both melodic and harmonic material. Melodically, 12-tone rows provided pitch material that could be applied directly to the generated rhythmic structures. By assigning pitches from a row to the generated rhythms, it became possible to create melodic lines without relying on usual melodic habits and tendencies. Harmonically, the rows were used as a source for chord construction and harmonization. Rather than treating the row strictly as a linear melody, I extracted pitches from it to create harmonic structures that could be applied to the generated material. Throughout the experiments, I found that the harmonic application of 12-tone material often produced stronger musical results than the melodic application. While some melodic outcomes felt dense and difficult to shape into clear phrases, the harmonic approach frequently created more direction and sometimes even suggested a tonal center despite being derived from 12-tone material. The research therefore showed that 12-tone rows can effectively lead both melodic and harmonic material, especially when they are used flexible as a source of pitch organization rather than a rigid compositional system. Ultimately, this leads back to the main research question. Overall, this research suggests that Adowa rhythms can function effectively as flexible compositional material within contemporary jazz composition and arrangement when they are approached through transcription, reduction, fragmentation, and transformation rather than simple imitation. The combination of Adowa-based rhythmic systems with Schoenberg's 12-tone technique also suggests a useful way of generating both rhythmic and melodic material throughout the compositional process. At the same time, the research suggests that both systems worked most effectively when applied flexible rather than rigidly. The use of AI-generated material further helped create unpredictability and move away from habitual compositional patterns, while the role of the composer remained essential in shaping, organizing, orchestrating, and developing the generated material into musical outcomes. This research suggests that combining Adowa rhythms with 12-tone techniques can be a useful and inspiring approach for composition. One of the main strengths of this research is the development of a system that transforms Adowa rhythms into a flexible compositional tool. The process of transcription, reduction, and fragmentation made it possible to move away from simply imitating the original music and instead use it as a source of new material. Another important element was the use of artificial intelligence. The AI-generated sequences were useful in creating unpredictable results and breaking out of habitual ways of composing. However, it also became clear that the generated material is not meaningful on its own. Many sequences were either too dense, too repetitive, or lacked a clear musical direction. The testing process also showed that some approaches were more effective than others. Working with fragments increased flexibility and variation, but sometimes led to material that felt disconnected or overly complex. Using 12-tone rows for harmonic material generally produced stronger results than using them for melodic development. Because a large part of the process focused on generating rhythmic material, the findings related to melodic and harmonic applications of 12-tone techniques remain more preliminary compared to the rhythmic aspects of the research. Overall, this research should therefore be understood less as a finished compositional system and more as a collection of strategies that work to different degrees depending on how they were applied. For future work, several directions became clear throughout the process. One important step would be to expand this approach to big band music and use it for arranging in that context. The use of sampled Adowa material, which was explored in this thesis, could function as a structural element, especially for solo sections, and could serve as a bridge towards more avant-garde jazz approaches. The creation of ostinato figures also showed a lot of potential and could be developed further, especially in combination with 12-tone techniques. The idea of using different tone rows to define or separate sections within a composition is another promising direction. The analysis of Darcy James Ague's work also points towards a strong direction for further research, particularly the way he combines structure and flexibility in relation to 12-tone material. Another aspect that showed promising results was writing for percussion instruments and focusing purely on rhythm. Working with generated rhythms and sequences opened new possibilities for percussion ensemble writing as well as coordination and independent studies on the drum set.
The live room. There comes Luca taking place for the Q&A. Thank you, Luca, for your presentation. So, also with you, I am your supervisor, so I'll be kicking off with some background info that not everybody would be able to know, because I happen to remember that you, of course, started off also thinking of including Messiaen's modes.
Exactly.
And I was really wondering at this point, after all this being behind you, how you feel about discarding that idea, if you, choosing more the 12-tone approach rather than the Messiaen modes. Just kind of how you feel about the choice. If you miss having done the Messiaen stuff, or if it's rather something that, I'm fine, I first did the 12-tone, maybe for the future. What are you thinking?
I think it was fine that I left it out, because also with the 12-tone, the original plan was to include more of it for the harmonic material and also the melodic material. But because the system took so much time and I went into really several ideas, that I think even the 12-tone was a little bit short in the thesis. So I would say it was good that I left it out. And for the future, I would say include more 12-tone and maybe then go to the Messiaen modes.
Yeah. And what type of potential do you now see for the Messiaen modes? Is it more melodic or rather chord scale like harmonic concepts? What would you take from it at this point?
I would say more chord scale and also more in the harmonic direction.
Yeah.
So maybe even mix it so that the 12-tone would be more melodic character, and then so that all three ideas could function in one system maybe.
So you still have it as a goal somewhere.
Yeah, it's somewhere there, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very nice. Yeah, and you already mentioned that you that you feel the 12-tone even still, you feel you could have more done with it. Maybe also though on the composing side, right? Where do you feel you're at with this exploration in your own work?
Of the 12-tone?
Yeah, and or the whole package of the outcome, let's say.
The whole package. Yeah, I would say like with that I have a lot of drafts now and a lot of systems that work. So, and there, like I said, the percussion thing is the most done and developed because I put a lot of time in the harmonization, the orchestration and the developing it. I would say also the having two lines and then putting chords to it and orchestrating it and harmonizing it is very far. And I would say that in terms of what different compositions came out of it, I have a big range, but more head arrangements or head like melodic framework, and then the whole composition is still something that lacks and something that is in the work that I mentioned also in the future research that I spent so much time on the different systems that this was a little bit short, I would say.
So the last follow-up on that is if you have any, out of those ideas, if there were any things that came out regarding ideas of form, so structure of a piece, because that's of course something you didn't really quite reach because you're in this earlier phase, and it took this time. It's fair to say that you needed this time, But now that we're here, maybe it's an interesting and important point to consider. Like, are there things out of either Adowa or 12-tone concepts that you would like to apply to form structure, to form? Or haven't given it enough thought yet? It's also fine, of course.
I think there was no thought yet, but I think the approach that seemed promising was that I used the same system for different parts of a composition that would shape then the form and then connect them in a way so that you reach a bigger form at the end, but you have separate parts. Could maybe go into that.
Tiny question that has to do with this, sorry to take longer, but the Adowa, typical Adowa piece length, what would it be? Like, how long would one Adowa piece sound?
So that depends a lot. So first we have,
right? So
it's ceremonial, exactly. Then we have the Cathy ensembles that is more royal, so for kings. And generally speaking, I would say it's a whole performance. There's not a lot of break. Yeah, exactly. So what happens a lot is that after improvisation is done, someone from the ensemble takes a new rhythm and then they go again. So it's more they stop and one continues and they build it up again. So it's more...
Does it feel a bit like a suite in that sense? Like an ongoing suite without interruption?
Maybe, Could be, So the different parts is actually where it came from, because with the same material, they develop it. So one pattern could stay in because all the others change. There's still the original pattern in it and the idea of it, but it developed in a very different direction.
Yeah, okay. Let's go to somebody else before I keep asking. You.
About the AI and limitations. So what are the AI limitations in the creative
limitations?
process?
Yeah, because what I noticed a lot was that you really had to follow up, like setting rules and saying, I need now this sequence or this combination, and still a lot of mistakes happen. So, for example, what I ended up with was that the AI went for the easiest way. So sometimes if you said, I need a combination, he did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you had always to be careful that you mentioned, okay, I don't want consecutive numbers. And even then, at the end, when it was almost done, he did it again, or changed something. So that was a little bit the confronting part. So the rule setting or the generating took sometimes a lot of time because, for example, for the ostinato thing, when I did 6 different lines, and I said, for example, every line needs different beat lengths. At the end, when you checked it again, it was 2 or 3 having the same length. So you had to be extra careful to not trust it too much.
Sure. Are you happy that you did this choice to use AI, or are you now like thinking like, why didn't I do like more traditional forms, like randomizing?
No, I'm actually very happy with it. It took more time because you have to double check it. But I think the outcomes that it gave me were sometimes so abstract that I would have not even thought about it. So it was actually nice also with the rhythms. And when you saw them underneath each other, what it created that you would not like naturally feel, oh, I could now put them together like this.
Cool. Nice.
Super quick question, but how did you harmonize the example that you showed after you Did
with the two lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so just basically I had the two lines and I tried out on the piano what worked, what I found sounded good. So there was no really concept behind it. I just
So it wasn't like 12 tone also behind the harmony?
No.
Okay.
That was really to go a little bit away from it. So to use only the top line and bottom line, and then the rest was
Okay.
on.
Okay, you want to say?
So you told if you ask for the AI for the number, like the random numbers, it's you give a sequence, and you are not accepting that sequence that is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Yeah.
6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
So you accept the second one. So is it like, how can I say? Can we say it like it's a random because you select it?
Yeah, so
You
it's
know what I mean?
yeah, I know what you mean. So it's randomized, but after you set the rules. So for each composition, there's also a different set of rules. So for example, if you want a longer phrase, you say you need 20 numbers or 10. So it's generated, but you have still control over it. But I think like we are not at this part now. Like I said, he wants to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and not go for something weird or crazy. So we still need to be in charge, I think.
Yeah, I think that's also a random.
Yeah.
One of the random 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Exactly, yeah.
That's what I asked.
Yeah, it's true.
You had a question?
Yeah, I do. Congratulations. I like it. We might share some interest
Yeah,
there. And actually, there is one that has kind of hunted me in both Western classical music, especially when Schoenberg, and also in Afrocentric music. That I want to ask you, what are your thoughts about counterpoint in these two words?
To add it as counterpoints.
Yeah, I mean, you did this work on both things. Did you do something related with counterpoint in both? Because on both words, that's a concept that is that I've discovered. I believe it's really important.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the thing, if you have any?
I actually didn't thought about that. So that's what I meant with the what is next to do is dive deeper in the 12th tone, in the serialism. So to get everything or more approaches from it, especially what I wanted to include, what I did not include at the end was also motivic development. So I would say this is maybe a good point to even add then to the what could be done with 12th tone and what is there yet to research about and to add to the rhythm.
Definitely. And in a follow-up, did you research in the same topic in Afrocentric music, Iowa, also Afro-American classical music, that is also, to me, incredibly inspiring in the field of counterpoint? Did you, also you're a drummer, which I don't know.
No, also not. The only thing what I did was with Simon Moulier. You know him, he was there, and we know each other from my bachelor studies, and we talked a little bit about it. And also he sat in one of the concerts or the dances, and he told me a little bit about it, and also how it develops and how it's a lot about just in the moment. There's nothing rehearsed, and it's just this natural feel for this ternary beat and structure. But it's definitely a point to take for the future. Say.
OYI WOYE, what does it mean?
It means let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah.
And that sort of ties into the improviser role.
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
It's something we discussed.
We
that
discussed
the Adowa
it, yeah.
ensemble has this improviser role, and it's not something that you particularly analyzed or something.
No.
Except you were able to tell me that the improviser also seems to basically use the same material, but freely.
Yeah.
And changing patterns and
Exactly.
very freely.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what your thoughts are on this role, and if you have been missing out on anything from it, or if it's just rather for the future things that you are gonna do with this topic, where you start needing that role again or something.
I would say looking back, I did not need it because the patterns he improvised with are all the patterns that are in there. So he just switches from pattern to pattern, and mostly it's like the main drummer who does the improvisation, and the rest is more something that is laid down for them to play on, because the music is not the main part. The main part is still the dance. So they need to provide just rhythm and the bass for the dancers.
Right.
So yes and no. The improvisation part could be a nice thing to look at. Also
in a drummer's context. If I have the groove, for example, I played them, and then see where they could evolve. But that's what I meant in the thesis. I mentioned that with all those patterns that I transcribed, the idea is even to take now the drum reductions I have and then change voices. So you keep first, third, and fourth, and the second voice is just going through the transcribed material. So in that sense, you would improvise with the same material and stay still in the context.
Just a tiny detail, just for me to realize which drum does the improvisers play, or is it depending? Can be several options.
It depends. So, like a lot of times, it's a aputan, exactly. So the really big one, and they are shared. So it's two. So one of them is mainly the master drummer, and sometimes even the kondo.
Oh, the lowest.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But again, this is. There's no fixed rule to say, because already the Kete ensembles and the Adowa ensembles, well, it's the same thing, and it took me a long time to find this out, to realize that, because I was like, where's this Kete coming from now? But it's the same thing, it just has a different name because they are only in charge to do music for the royals.
Yeah. Great. Any more questions? Yes, Felipe.
Curiosity. Have you very nice research? Have you explored with other techniques for composing melodies there, or was just the 12-tone rule?
Was just 12 tone.
It's just maybe it's just a thought I had.
Yeah,
I mean, the same concept could work super nice if you just work. I mean, I'm working, for example, now with random interval combinations that I like. And then I have this like a framework for a melody.
Yeah.
And then you could just assign that, for example, to have a melody, you know, or then the many other things that I can think about that you could use for producing nicer melodies.
Outcomes, yeah.
I mean, from some of the examples that you gave, it sounded to me, oh, that's really random, you know, like, you know. That's, of course, depends on the rules that you give, or maybe the 12-tone rule might generate, I mean, I'm also exploring with that, and sometimes it's just for me, it's like, this is a bit too much. Maybe you can work, I mean, the ideas for further development, you know, you can work with different strategies.
I mean, that's the good point about this tool. So, and that's why I spend more time on developing different ideas, what you can generate with the tool, so you can just take something else and put it on top of it. So yeah, it's a nice add-on.
Great. That seems to conclude it. Thank you so much, Luca, for your presentation. So we will be holding our second recess now, after which at 3:30 we will be back for the final presentation of Octavian Taborsky. Thank you.